We're going to start with the garment construction now on our jacket. And the first step is to stay stitch the collar and the back neck edge. And here's a little picture of what we're going to do right there. Stay stitch is just a form of stitching. A straight stitch is going to go in a 1/2 inch from the edge, and that will be permanently there. We're not going to remove it later. This will help the garment to not stretch out over time as it's being worn. I'm going to have my stitch setting on 3.5, a straight stitch with my needle in the middle. We're just going to carry on like this. I'm going to do the collar pieces, this back piece, and we'll continue with step 2. Step 2, we're going to reinforce where the inner corner is at on the front and collar. And here is a picture right here of what we're going to do. And that's just sewing 1 inch along that normal seam line, and then we're going to clip it to the corner where the dot is marked. So that's simple enough. We're just using a straight stitch, and we're at the 5/8 inch mark. Needle down and turn. Make sure that's at 5/8 of an inch. And so, that's it. That's all we have to do on that one. And then just clip to the corner. Careful not to clip through those threads right there. So we would just clip it right to about that point, and do that on all 4 pieces. After we have put our stay stitching here at the top of the collar shoulder piece and here at this little corner to reinforce that, we're going to put right sides together of this front collar piece here at the neck, and we're going to match that up, and we're going to sew that at 5/8 of an inch right there. Sewing our shoulder seam here, the back of the neck of the front collar piece, I think is the correct name. Little back stitch. Try not to go over our needle. And back stitch again, and that piece is finished. Now we skip to step 7 because we're not doing that little back tab, and it says with right sides together, stitch back to side back sections, and you can see that right here. And I have my side back patterns, and I'm going to stitch those. Remember, we're going to put the right sides together. Now sometimes on the knit fabric it's hard to tell what is the right side, but where it has these little chain looking stitch, that is the right side. And the other side is kind of a little waffle weave looking stitch, and that's just, you have to look really careful sometimes. So we're going to match up our notches on this, and we're just going to stitch with a stretch stitch and meet back. I want to just take a minute and talk about some sewing techniques that I have learned, and I'm not a professional. I don't pretend to be a professional. I just do these videos upon request to try and help the group. When you are sewing a garment, you want to start at the top and sew your way down to the bottom of the garment, or where the hem would be. And I use 5/8 of an inch, which is industry standards for a seam allowance. I know a lot of people don't, but I do. And we are working with a commercial pattern, so that is the seam allowance here. If your machine does not have a mark on it, please measure it out mark it with tape or a marker, draw a line there, or get one of those magnetic seam allowance markers that can go right there. It's really important that you try to sew your seams straight and keep your allowance exact through all of the pieces of your garment so that your construction turns out well, because we don't want to put all of this time and effort into making this piece of clothing and have it turn out poorly or look sloppy or look homemade. So make sure that you measure your seam allowances and always start from the top of the garment, which in this case would be the shoulder or the neck, and work all the way down to the waist. This is where we're at so far in our garment construction. We want to turn the seams in towards the center of the jacket and just lightly press with an iron, and make sure you put a pressing cloth in between the knit fabric and the iron. Very, very low heat, almost no heat at all. We don't want to scorch our fabric or melt anything. Just give it a little bit of a press to help it lay nicely so we can finish the construction of our jacket. Here we are at step 3, and this part's a little bit tricky because we're taking this curved section and we're sewing it to this curved section. But when we put it right sides together, we have kind of an outer curve that we're sewing into an inner curve. So we're going to have to do a little bit of fabric manipulating and ease it in. It says right here, with right sides together, pin front and collar to side front sections. So we're going to do that. I'm going to do the pinning, and then we're going to stitch it together and see how it looks. I'm going to start by matching up our notches here, because this is the important part that we need to really make sure matches before we put in the rest of our pins. Now you can see right there is where we're going to have a problem. This is just a test of patience. We just have to really take it slow, pin it a little at a time, and just ease the fabric right into shape. There you can see that's exactly where I need to have it. Now I can pin it and stitch it. I'm going to apologize because my grandbaby's playing with some of his music toys in the background, so there is a little bit of distraction noise. I'm going to sew this piece of the front side to the front collar piece just so that you can see. We're going to do a little bit of a back stitch right there, and we're going to try and not run over any pins because that will help to break our sewing machine needles. And you can see I'm going really slow. Sewing around the camera is a bit difficult too. I don't want to stretch this fabric out and distort it. I'm using a soft knit, but this jacket pattern also says that you can use fleece, and fleece distorts really easy if you pull on it too hard. So if you're using fleece to make this jacket, really keep that in mind, not to pull on it as you're sewing. And sewing is not a race. You can take all the time that you need to get it done correctly, because it's better to do it correctly than have to stop and grab your seam ripper or have to recut your fabric and re-sew. So it's always better to take your time and less stress that way. It seems every time that I've ever sewed in a hurry when I had a deadline for something, I just made mistake after mistake. And it happens to all of us regardless of your experience level. And I always tell myself, slow down, calm down, and the mistakes then, they stop happening. I have my stitch length on a 3.5 here still, and it's on a zigzag, about a medium zigzag. My machine has other stretch stitches, but I just seem to prefer the zigzag a little bit more. It just works better. And back stitch. Now remember, we have this extra piece of fabric here at the end because that's where our circle peplum is going to go later.